The Autobiography of Malcolm X, as told to Alex Haley, author of Roots. This is one of the best, my personal favorite so far, best autobiography I've ever read. I like crime fiction. As I mentioned previously, the No Beast So Fierce by Edward Bunker. My favorite parts of this were the parts where Malcolm X is in Boston and New York, and he's a criminal. And it's just really raw. You kind of get to see like New York, Harlem in the 40s and 50s before now. So anyway, Malcolm X, as a lot of you know, was a political figure and a religious man with the black Muslims, Elijah Muhammad, in the 60s, and they really grew this like religion in the U.S. I knew very little about it. I saw probably more interviews about his counterpart, Martin Luther King, and so I knew very little about Malcolm X. And I got this book fairly early. I knew I wanted to read it, but I was saving it for the right time, and I read it last spring, I believe. I read it on like this is like a little backstory. I read it on like the subway. I would bring it with me, and I created this little cover for it so that so I wouldn't be judged, you know. I figured like this is kind of, I don't know, maybe it's, I have a thing where like I don't necessarily want people to know what I'm reading, except like if I'm out really sharing it with them. But I like to form my own opinions, so I wanted to kind of like savor this. And you know, it's like New York. It's a diverse community, and I thought like, as a white person, I thought like maybe African Americans might think, oh boy, he looks lost, you know, if he's reading Malcolm X. And then white people might think the same, who knows. But Malcolm X was like very militant, as opposed to you know, Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King wanted integration. Malcolm X wanted everybody separate. So this autobiography about him is just very, very compelling. Tells about his past. His father was a preacher. Like his earliest memory was like, you know, racist white people lighting their house on fire, trying to like, you know, force his parents to like leave town. And so he grew up in this turmoil. His mom was white, and she hated white people, I think. So he's actually a redhead, you know. He was in later chapters, he was called Detroit Red. I forget the Detroit part because he was not from Detroit. He was like from, let's see, I want to say Michigan. Lincoln, Nebraska, I believe. He was kind of like an interesting character, even physically. I feel like there's something genetically about people that if they're like physically different, they also perceive themselves differently. And I felt like he had a bit of that complex. I felt he was different, but he had something kind of like wild about him. From the very beginning, I feel like even the way he handled, like when he became a Muslim, was like to the extreme, and there was like a kind of switch of madness that happened when he was in jail, especially. So anyway, let's see if I can go chronologically a bit through this. So he had like a pretty tough childhood in Lincoln, and there was like some segregation there, and he previewed a bit of that. There was an interesting instant when he was in school, and he went to the counselor career counselor, and he said, like, you know, what I want to be when I grow up is a lawyer. This white woman said, like, you can't be a lawyer, you know, like, you're black, basically, you know, and that always stuck with him. So there's like little things like that. There was like this little story about like Laura, who was like this innocent girl that he kind of like dissed, and then years later she comes back. He runs into her in Harlem, and she's like totally corrupted. Or I forget. I don't want to be misrepresenting, but either when he was visiting back to Lincoln, or I believe it was actually in Harlem that he saw her. So yeah, she was totally corrupted by then, and it was like kind of a sad thing. And he felt like responsible, and then so he stayed, like, his mom went nuts, and like he stayed with like these white people that kind of raised him and groomed him, and then he moved with his aunt in Boston, and that's when things really kind of started to click for him. He got some independence, and then he was like working tickets on the train to New York, and that's when he was like stay over in New York, and then he got this like white girl that was like in a relationship with some guy, or maybe even married, and she supported him back and forth, so she would come into trips to New York with him, and you know, they would party in Harlem, and she got a kick out of that. And he was like, you know, she thought he was older. He was like very young, like 18, and like, so back in Boston he used to start like shining shoes, and he graduated to like becoming a hustler, and he would drive Johns. He would pick them up at 42nd Street, these old rich white guys, and he would drive them up to Harlem, where like black hookers would do all kinds of paid atrocities to them, you know, that they would want, like, you know, like all sexual acts and things. So then when he became Muslim later on, like he would list these like you know, that as like evidence that white people were evil, and that black people didn't even have like the imagination for such like sexual deviancy and like even violence as white people. So it was kind of interesting. It was compelling. It was a compelling argument, interesting argument. So yeah, so he goes, what happens is he's in Harlem, and he's a hustler, and this is like before he gets caught eventually. But what ends up happening in Harlem, he's messing around with this guy named Reggie, I believe. That guy runs numbers in Harlem, and basically it's like a gambling ring. And if police caught you running numbers, like, you know, if they stop you and they check your pockets and you have like a little paper with numbers written on it, then they book you, they bring you in. So this guy used to log numbers and then bring him into like whomever at the top. Like people would give him money, pick their numbers, he would bring him in, and whoever won the numbers, he would come back and give him a payout. It's a gambling ring. So this guy would keep all the numbers in his head. And Malcolm X, you know, Detroit Red at the time, being as smart as he thought he was, you know, he thought, like, I'm going to run a number on this guy, and I'm just going to tell him I won and have him pay me out like a few $100s, I think $300 or something like that, which was a big payout in 1950. And so he tells the guy, like, oh, I won the other day. I got the winning number. He's like, no, you didn't, because I remember all the numbers. It's my job, my career is on the line. This is what I do, you know. And he's like, okay, wait, you know, Malcolm X is like, oh, okay, you know, you don't want to pay me? Sure, you know, fine, you know, say as you want. And the guy was like, no, I'll pay you, because if I argue with you, then it looks bad on me. But so then he pays Malcolm. Malcolm is spending the money, taking out his like a white girlfriend and all that. But the guy goes back and checks, the numbers, and it turns out that like Malcolm lied basically. So he comes back to Malcolm and he's like, you stiffed me, and now the law of the street is I got to put a bullet in your head. So come outside and you're going to be dead, So Malcolm runs out of the place and runs to Boston. I mean, he was really, essentially, this guy was such a badass. He was run out of New York. He was run out of Harlem, which is like kind of a, maybe like the worst neighborhood crime-wise in the 1950s that you could be in. So he was run out of like the hardest neighborhood you could be in New York in 1950 because he was such a ballsy guy, tries to stiff, this high up criminal for $300. So anyway, so he runs to Boston, stays with his aunt, and he's still got like the white girl that he's seeing, and she's like, he's staying with her, and he's just doped up. He's like, he lists in the book like how much weed he was smoking each day. It was crazy. He's got his gun with him. He basically plays Russian roulette with this guy that like, I think he was, I remember, he was like, he was taking care of old white people. He was kind of like a nurse. And then so he plays Russian roulette with this guy to show how crazy Malcolm is, and in an effort to convince him, like, look, I'm fucking crazy. You do what I say, or else like somebody's gonna get his brains blown out. And so Malcolm's idea was to rob these old people's houses, and this guy was his in. So he basically forces this guy and his girlfriend and another girl, I think, to run this burglary ring in Boston. And they're burglarizing houses. There's descriptions like where he says like he literally stole jewelry from around the neck of sleeping couples. Like, that's how freaking good and ballsy he was. He would like sneak in the bedroom, dark bedroom, sneak up to these people and slowly take the jewelry off their necks. And when I was reading it, it almost seemed to me like these people, like, even if you would realize what's happening, you'd probably pretend you were asleep, like, because you could die, So it's like that's how intense like those burglaries were. Like if you were in bed and you got a criminal and you got no defense, and maybe you think like they got a gun, you just better pretend you're asleep, But maybe they were, But I think the claim was that he was so good, he could unbuckle the necklace off like an old lady or a watch off somebody's wrist as they were sleeping, and they wouldn't know it. That's how smooth he was. And eventually the police caught him, and they gave him 8 years. His idea was that the reason he got 8 years because they were so racist, which I would agree with. They're very likely the case, that they were so appalled that he defamed this white girl that they gave him 8 years, like just because they were so appalled by the fact that he, what they saw is like taking advantage of this white girl, which it was, in a lot of cases, it was in my belief, it was probably the other way around. She got a thrill from like hanging out with this hoodster. Yeah, and then he's in jail, and then this chapter called Satan. I think it was like kind of a tactic so people wouldn't mess with him, but he was certainly frustrated that he was in jail, but I think it was a tactic. He started to like just go nuts, and they put him in like the hole, and he would scream and like refuse to eat, and this went on for months and months, and everybody in all the cells like could hear him, and they just started to call him Satan, because he would just spend like until he loses his voice, he would just scream out like all these obscenities, like he was nuts. But I feel like that's one tactic if you get in jail, so people don't mess with you, is like act as freaking crazy as you possibly can, so they don't freaking mess with you. And then once, I guess, he created that distance, I mean, he's such a smart man, like such a survivalist, you know? So once he created that distance, this reformed Muslim approached him and started to preach to him. And at first, you know, he thought like, oh, you're kind of like, he thought he was a bit nuts, and he didn't want to believe. And then the guy convinced him, said like, look, you know, like, if you want to make it out of here, you better go straight. And this is like, you know, if you become like a better person, a religious person, that's one way to get out of this place, because otherwise, like, there's no escape, jail. You know, like, you keep acting up, they're going to just tack on another year or so, and then you'll never be in. And this was like his escape. And by the time he came out, and he met, like, he started to write to Elijah Muhammad, and he met him eventually face to face, and, you know, it was like a teary-eyed thing. He really believed in Elijah Muhammad, which was like the leader of the black Muslims. It changed his life, and he was like a fanatic about the religion. And while he was in jail, he read a lot of books, and that's why he needed glasses, because he said he would read, you know, once they closed the lights, the guards would pass by, and you know, you weren't allowed to be awake. So he'd like put the book down when he heard them, and then he'd pick it up and just kind of, you know, whatever little light he could get through his cell, he would keep reading all night. Sometimes wouldn't sleep at all. He read voraciously. One of the things he learned, let's see if because I've got some pages earmarked. I think this is the big one here. What I wanted to cover is, there we go. Well, what's hard to read, you know, as a white person, it would be hard to read all the stuff about like the white man being evil, but it's compelling, his arguments, you know. But just the backstory, the black Muslims in America were founded on the idea that there was this ostracized African from the Middle East, and there was this scientist, and he found, you know, 60,000 followers, and he put them on an island, and he bred them that only the lighter races would survive, and he would kill any offspring that were darker, or like, you know, parents that were darker, and so he would keep the lightest, and then he released these white people that were like albinos almost by the end, and to infiltrate and destroy, you know, the black race, to punish the black race that he was embittered against. I guess this is him, Mr. Yukum. So he's like written as a scientist of sorts, and he created this white race of evil. So all the qualities of like the white race are evil, and like and the black race that existed before, because apparently everybody was black or dark before, you know, this devil race, as is highlighted here. They were like, you know, the smartest race, and they had a rich history, and now these like devil race infiltrated and really corrupted the black race, and then over generations, they ended up repressing and enslaving the black race. So it's a little wild to say that one race is evil than another. I think, like, I don't know, but that's what their belief was, and I don't know if there's any proof that island existed with 59,999 followers. Anyway, that was the belief. Once he got out of jail, he became a devoted Muslim, and he helped promote. He was very, very vocal. He was a great speaker, great debater. and he was very vocal in expanding the black Muslims across the U.S. And he recruited a lot of other former prisoners, which ended up probably resulting in him being assassinated later on, because he recruited so many people that a lot of criminals went straight, and then they probably still had that criminal mentality. They were more inclined to act violently to remove somebody that was maybe controversial to the community. So what ended up happening was he promoted them. There was one incident that was very important, where in Harlem, after he was a Muslim, a few years in, the police beat up this kid like really badly, and they took him in for interrogation, but they wouldn't allow him to go to the hospital. And then so he gathered a bunch of Muslims who were all decked out in like suits and really professional people, because they were trying to show that like black people were actually just as worthy, just as smart, maybe even smarter than white people. They marched to the police station until, after insisting, they let out the young man, and they let him take him to the hospital. And that was like a really big thing, because the police in Harlem were overwhelmed by the show of force, like just the intimidation of like these militant standing men, which is very well illustrated in the film that was made by Spike Lee, Malcolm X, starring Denzel Washington. They did a nice segment there of that scene. So that was like a big incident that put them on the map, and there was like a big article written in a newspaper, like, kind of contrasting how like now black people and the black Muslims are like racist against white, and so they kind of played him as like a racist, So what ended up happening long term was that Elijah Muhammad, the leader of the black Muslims, he portrayed himself as like a noble figure, and then it was found out that he had like impregnated his 40 years his junior secretaries and helpers within the black Muslims, and that came out in the news, and Malcolm X was shocked by that, and he voiced some objections to that, and he confronted Elijah Muhammad, and after, I think, a comment after JFK was assassinated, he said something like, what's good for the gander, or something like that, and they used that excuse to ban him from speaking on behalf of the black Muslims, and so he was like eventually banned, and he also, like I said, he was objected to Elijah Muhammad, to his like, hypocrisy, and then by that point he had about like 4 children with his wife Betty, and here it is, chickens come home to roost. That's what he said regarding the president's assassination. So they thought that was like a little too controversial. Yeah, so he was kind of in a tough predicament, and then he didn't take any money, he didn't really even take a salary. He just kind of, everything was comped, because he was like an ambassador for the organization, the religion. And they opened all these like segments in Chicago, and like there were all these mosques. Then they threatened to take his house away, which was comped. And then towards the end, even the author states that it was uncertain whether Malcolm X, being as crazy as he was and like maybe vindictive, when the Muslims threatened to take his home away, he claimed that they mollied his house and burned it up, so he had to like evacuate his family. but it's very possible, the author said, that he may have done it. He may have staged it as a publicity thing and as a way, like, hey, you want to take my house away? Like, how about I burn it up? Like, that's how intense Malcolm X was. And I wouldn't be, I mean, that's just, it's a possibility, but I wouldn't be surprised, to be honest, because based on his kind of record, he was just so crazy, like, crazy like a fox, like a red-headed fox. He was an intense guy, and he could do anything. That was the thing about him. But then he also, people were following him, and there were like threats, cars would pull up, and like he was afraid towards the end that he was going to get assassinated. And sure enough, he did. But the great thing before he got assassinated was that his aunt from Boston, I mean, he was broke, but his aunt from Boston paid for a trip to Mecca, and he went to pray as a Muslim in Mecca. And there on his trip, and he stopped in Africa a little on his way back, he learned that it wasn't a black and white thing as much. And I think like his new philosophy would have been more like he would have clung more to the Muslim religion rather than the black Muslims, and that would have, I think he would have in the long run done a really, really good thing for America in bringing the Muslim religion and the loving nature aspect of that Muslim religion to America, whereas he was a little misconceived about the black Muslims because they wanted to create their own state, which would have been very difficult within the U.S. To basically try to get everybody in whatever area of the U.S. to vacate, just like Israel. Imagine Israel, you pick a land there and everybody either leave or amalgamate. So it would have been very difficult, but I think as a Muslim, I think he could, if he would have, with age, become a little bit more docile, he could have done some good things, I think, through diplomacy. If he would have become more diplomatic and less militant, I think he could have done a lot of great things. So that's kind of what it ends on, his coming back from Mecca and being a little bit more open-minded. But that never came to be because soon after that, he was gunned down extremely brutally. Right over here, in Upper Manhattan, I actually live close to that building, and that was part of my interest in reading this autobiography because I passed that building very often near 168th Street and Broadway. It's like the Audubon Ballroom. So I pass it all the time. There's a Chase Bank there now. And I often see Muslims nearby where they're just kind of praying or recording some social media thing. And they just kind of hang about. And I order fish from the famous fish market at 145th. It occurred to me after I read this book that when I walk in, you kind of tell it's just a very simple kind of frying place. You kind of wonder if the guys there are former cons. And I believe that the owner might very well be a Muslim. I don't know for sure. But some if I would go in there for a big order, he would come out and just kind of show himself kind of as a thank you, and he would ask the guys hey, can I have a piece of fish? He eats the product, that sort of advertisement, self-advertisement, he believes in the product. So he would kind of show himself like that, and it's a nice little shop that's been around for years. So I feel they tried to kind of save themselves after the atrocity of gunning down Malcolm X, the black Muslims, which according to history, Elijah Muhammad did authorize that it was okay to gun him down. So these guys took it upon themselves. Maybe it wasn't like an official like order, but it was one of those kind of a wink, sort of thing. But wild story. And then the last parts kind of focus on like his funeral and things like that. There's all these little details, which was a little kind of boring, but maybe necessary. So it was an amazing feat that the author followed him right to the end, and they met every night, or like a couple of times a week, and they would record their conversations, and he embellished and made it like more literary. But what a story! What a story! Phenomenal story. Every human being should read this story. It's an incredible life. Incredible human being. I think he had a lot of potential for good. He was very vocal, sometimes in controversial, well, often in very controversial ways, because he was an unconventional thinker. But these are the best kind of thinkers, and he really fought against what was the norm in American society for African Americans during that time. And he went to jail and he reformed himself, and he came out and he tried to do something positive, and he tried to represent the black community in America in a positive way. And he did it, and he changed history, I think in the end, in a very, very positive way. And he'll never be forgotten. Never be forgotten. And this is one of the great works of literature of all time.